All right, let's talk about Greg Hardy. You know what? No, we're going to talk about Greg Hardy, Ben Sassoli, but we're going to talk about it in two different forms. I want to give credit where credit's due to both guys. Ben Sassoli came and put it on the line, man. A lot of people, even myself, coming into this fight, didn't know a lot about Ben Sassoli, but then you watched some of the playback of fights he'd been in. This guy brings heavy heat, and he's going to be throwing power when he throws. And Greg Hardy, obviously, we know coming into this fight had some issues with the weight cuts, had issues with different rules and following those rules coming into the fight. And there's always controversy when Greg Hardy gets in the cage, obviously with his stuff outside of the cage from his days in the NFL that we're not going to talk about, just because I think it's been talked about enough. Obviously, I'm not a supporter of those certain things at all. But inside of the cage, as an athlete, I do want to cover him to the most fair degree, to the most unbiased degree. So we're going to do that. So in this fight, Greg Hardy comes out, and not only does he show improvement, but this guy's showing improvement at a rapid pace. Now, you guys might not understand the difference between Greg Hardy's last fight and this fight, but it's the understanding from him that he can use his range now. He's a tall guy. Greg Hardy has something like a 78-inch reach. He's starting to use that range. He's starting to use that reach. He's leg kicking, inside, outside, mixing it up, being unpredictable. He's feinting. Greg Hardy is feinting now. So what I wanted to talk about with this video isn't so much Greg Hardy's fight with Ben Sassoli and a deep breakdown, detailed understanding of what happened. And we'll get to, obviously, the inhaler talk. I understand it's part of it, and it has to be talked about with this fight, and it has to be talked about with Greg Hardy because of his past transgressions, not only in the octagon, but just, him getting into the sport has been a controversy, so we have to talk about the controversies. But in this case, I want to talk about something very specific. We are just now beginning to see in MMA athletes from other realms transition over. For example, Greg Hardy, NFL All-Pro athlete, coming over. You have Royce White. I don't know if you guys know who Royce White is. He is an NBA or former NBA player coming over to MMA. You saw guys like Brendan Schaub, who was a practice squad NFL guy. A ton of guys that have been successful in other avenues have tried this and not really been successful, but a few have. A few have gotten to that point where they're very successful. Greg Hardy is the one I point to because Greg Hardy is an all-pro NFL player. I think he was 315 pounds as a defensive end. This is a big athlete, and you've seen now that he can cut this weight. He has one of the quickest jabs at heavyweight, in my opinion, right now, outside of Francis Ngannou and Stipe Miocic. Head movement, feinting now. He is learning the sport at a very rapid pace, something that other athletes that aren't the caliber of athlete he is could not do. The reason I say all of this, the reason I'm bringing it up is we are going to see as we move forward in the sport, and I can't take credit for this. My boy Louis Smolka on Twitter brought this up, and it made me think, oh my God, it's coming. 20 years from now, he said, what happens when we see a guy like Greg Hardy at his division and every other division? Basically saying, what happens when we see athletes that aren't just, people that started training MMA at a young age, but athletic people that didn't go into football, didn't go into basketball, didn't go into baseball. Can you imagine a LeBron James training MMA at a young age for 20 years and then becoming a contender in the UFC? Can you imagine someone like Chad Ochocinco, Terrell Owens, Bo Jackson, for Christ's sake, training MMA and becoming an MMA athlete? Those guys are such a different level of specimen athletically. To bring them into the sport against people that aren't necessarily the greatest athletes as individuals is what we're seeing. We are seeing this now in MMA. And in some cases, it isn't working out for the best. Aaron Pico has struggled a little bit as a high-level athlete. But the athleticism that Greg Hardy has put on display is a quick reminder as to what the sport of MMA will look like going forward. I'm excited for it because I understand the level of MMA, the level of athlete, rather, that the NFL franchises hold, that the NBA franchises hold. These athletes are the best on the planet. Bar none. These are the best athletes on the planet. And for them to transition into the UFC and for kids to watch that and say football isn't the only way or basketball isn't the only way, and to wake up a generation of kids that are already interested in fighting or are already interested in MMA or martial arts or whatever it is. We are going to see the wave of the athlete come through the UFC or through MMA in general. And when we do, it is going to be scary. It will be very, very difficult to match up with somebody that is the size of a Greg Hardy or the length of the LeBron James or Anthony Davis. As long as they can make the 265 limit, premier athletes are coming. And in Greg Hardy's case, they're already here. The MMA world is in for a rude awakening when these athletes decide to transition. And it's coming sooner than you think. But outside of that, I just wanted to get that out of the way because it just dawned on me when watching Greg Hardy how quickly he's learning leg kicks, how quickly he's learning how to feint, and what it means to feint for your opponent, to find those openings by feinting. He's not just throwing looping shots, he's throwing straight shots. He's throwing quick jabs, straight right hands, using his shots to set up leg kicks. He's defending wrestling. He's moving in the cage. And so, obviously, we're going to have to talk about this, but Greg Hardy comes out, wins the first round handily, I think wins the second round handily, and in between the second and third rounds, there is a little confusion here. Greg Hardy sits down on his stool. We, as a viewer watching the telecast, don't know this happens, but we get informed by Daniel Cormier, Dominic Cruz, and John Anik on the broadcast that Greg Hardy just used an inhaler in the corner. And by the way they tell us that he used an inhaler, by basically all being baffled that it was allowed to happen, we already know that it's illegal. And if you didn't know, it's illegal. You cannot use, even if it is, and we'll get into what Greg Hardy's defense was, even if it's approved by USADA, if it's approved by in this case, Massachusetts State Athletic Commission, it does not matter who it's approved by. On fight night, you cannot use foreign aid in a fight. You just can't. And this has been said on tons of people's podcasts and on Twitter. For example, you can't have Gatorade in the octagon. You can't have Gatorade as soon as you get into your training room in the building that night. You have to have only commission provided, not commission observed or not commission approved, commission provided water. They will open the waters for you. This is from Chael Sonnen's podcast, and give it to you. That is the only thing you can. No food, no Gatorade, none of that. So to believe you can use your inhaler, which is giving you oxygen, which is opening up your lungs to breathe deeper oxygen, in turn helping you recover, is wildly inappropriate for a fighter. And most importantly, his corner. If you guys don't know, Dean Thomas is in Greg Hardy's corner. Dean Thomas is a veteran of the game. Guy has cornered guys like Tyron Woodley. He's been around for a ton of years. He knows everything in and out. And for them to give him his inhaler after, I didn't hear anybody say, yes, you can have your inhaler. I don't know if there was a commission guy off on the side that said, yeah, he can have it. But it seemed like there was a confusion when he asked. So Greg Hardy says, can I use my inhaler? To what I'm assuming is a commission executive sitting beside him. You don't hear a yes or a no, and that's probably because the microphone can't pick it up. But I just hear it's in my pocket. One of his cornermen, I don't know if it was Dean specifically, but Dean is in that corner, hands it to him, and Greg Hardy says, yeah, it's USADA approved. Well, what the hell does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Greg takes 2 puffs of it, and he's ready to go for the third round, and you can't tell me that he didn't look like a different fighter in that third round versus the second, because he did. Because he had a better, deeper breathing apparatus at that point. I understand the guy has asthma. I completely understand it. It doesn't make it okay. It just doesn't. It doesn't make it okay if you have some sort of Adderall need. If you have ADHD, you can't pop Adderall while you're in the octagon. You can't do it, even if it's on your USADA approved list. Even if USADA said, yeah, you can take that. Because you can take it outside of the fight night. You can't take that in the cage. It doesn't matter if it's Tylenol, anything. You can't take that in the cage. It's going to aid you in the fight. For anybody to say it's not going to aid him in the fight, why would he take it? Why would he take it if it's not going to aid him in the fight? It's going to aid his breathing. Yes, I understand very well an asthma attack can happen. But that is something you have to prepare for as a fighter. If you are going to get into an MMA octagon or a ring, if you have asthma, it is something you've always lived with. If you know you have it, you have to train for the fact that you might have an issue with your asthma. Because the other fighter on the other side, if we can just bring out asthma or inhalers, the other fighter on the other side should be able to have an oxygen tank in between rounds. Of course, you see the problem here. Once you start making rules for everybody, the rules don't matter. Right? Rules are in place for a reason. They cannot bend. They will not break for any individual. And so Greg Hardy comes out in the third round. Like I said, as the fight, specifically in the fight, Greg Hardy does a phenomenal job. He uses his jab really well. Again, continues with the leg kicks. Ben Sisoli comes forward in the third, hits some shots, does some damage, tries to make the fight interesting in the last couple of minutes, and Greg Hardy just does a good job of staying at range and not getting touched by some big shots from Sisoli late in the fight. And obviously the fight ends. The crowd boos furiously, mostly because Greg Hardy is in the octagon, and they award Greg Hardy the decision. Well, a couple hours later, we find out Greg Hardy has now been stripped of his decision win, and it is going to be a no contest because he used his inhaler. I'm not so much making this about Greg Hardy using it as much as his corner and Dean Thomas, guys that have been in this game for a long time, an American Top Team. I don't understand it. I don't understand how you let this happen, how you don't prepare for this, and why not only you allowed it to happen, but you enabled it to happen by having it in your pocket to begin with and pulling it out. You can't do it. It's unfortunate because I thought Greg Hardy had a pretty good performance, but it's another controversy that we have to deal with Greg Hardy. I'm sure he's going to have another fight soon. Let's hopefully find out what kind of fighter Greg Hardy is. No controversy. And I think he's pretty damn good.